Thank you. So I see I'm in the coveted position. Not only am I in between y'all and lunch, but I'm in between y'all and doing the group picture too. So I will try and watch my time judiciously on that. I also promise I did not talk to Louis or Jim or Ann about my talk, although I did talk to Ellen about her talk before that. So, but you will see a lot of things similar through these talks as we go through it on here. So this is a little bit of work I did a couple years ago on optimizing treatments, state transition modeling, genetic algorithm. The person that was talking about optimization. So it's one of the other button. Okay, cool, got the right button. So it's just me. You already got all that. So I can talk a little bit about the context of the study. I'll talk about review the genetic algorithms. I'll discuss how I actually implemented them. I'll show a little bit of the results, and I'll talk a lot more about next steps on what we're doing. So as we talked about, Region 3 developed a set of state and transition models. We used them for doing the natural range of variation analysis for all the forest plans that were done in the Southwest region, Arizona, New Mexico, as well as they were used for the forest plan effects analysis. So these models were all developed. I think there's some folks here that maybe had some history of it, and they're fairly well documented. I think there's some papers on it, like the 2010 and 2014 conference about all this work that went on. And so I walked into these models. They're already developed. All the growth transitions, all the treatment transitions have all been worked out. So after we finished the forest plan work in the region, we were sitting there, we had this wonderful analysis framework and all this data to support it. We're like, well, what do we do with all this? And the thought was to downscale these models and plan from doing forest level work to landscape level work, sort of that 100,000 acres, 6-level watershed kind of scale. One of the projects came up, I don't expect y'all to be able to read this, but I threw it in there just in case people want to read the slides about the project. It was the Encino Vista landscape restoration project the forest is doing. I'll show a map of where it's at, but it's roughly 130,000 acres in the northern Mexico area, really gorgeous area. It's a area that's very unique, I think, perhaps in the Americas, which it harkens back quite a bit to some of the very old colonial stuff. Still a lot of people living very subsistence type of life, people single cattle grazing, where firewood gathering is not like an amenity, it's like a way of life, like it's how you stay alive during the wintertime. So some people are pretty concerned about this landscape. And there you can see it. So there's Santa Fe. I live right down here. No, I live right. You want to look at it. So gorgeous areas, as people know, just a little bit of history. Santa Fe, longest continually occupied capital, state capital in the United States. So very, very old history on this area. So I think, as we alluded to, as Ellen showed in this, we had a bit of a problem during the whole forest planning process, as well as the project level stuff, which is this dry mixed conifer type, very prevalent across the landscape, but also very important commercially and ecologically. So as you can see, if we look, this is some projections I did. So here's kind of what happens over time if you just run it in this particular area, and here's the desired conditions. So you can see we're, only about half of what we want to be on the landscape. And as they're doing a landscape restoration project, you're like, well, that's really not quite what we want to happen. We want to restore the landscape to here. We want to get back to our desired reference conditions, right? So how do we do this? So that's the whole purpose of the project itself. But it wasn't getting there. So they asked me, I was doing just the base modeling as well as this. So they asked me to look at it, and I was like, there's got to be a better solution, right? Is there a better solution? I have a background in operations and research. As we know, I won't get into it too much, but there's a couple techniques like linear programming, dynamic programming, integer programming. They give you exact solutions. Forest Service used to do that stuff. We're still doing that stuff for some timber work. There's also what's called a branch of work called heuristic search, heuristic is just a big fancy word for rule of thumb kind of thing. And there are a lot of techniques for doing that: simulated annealing, taboo search, and the one that I did for this topic, which is genetic algorithms. So I was kind of happy to hear Jim talk about genetic algorithms, and also let Stephen Jay Gould used to read his books all the time. So interesting. In essence, it's really, if you understand genetics, it's really pretty straightforward application of genetics. Technique goes back into the late 60s, early 70s, or some of the original research papers on it. But you start with initial population. You calculate the fitness of each individual. I'll talk about that a little bit more. You pick some individuals to be parents, survival of the fittest. Cross over the parents, create children. You apply a mutation rate that's out there, just kind of change things. Mutations happen. And then you get a new population, and then just lather, rinse, and repeat. Just kind of keep turning through the cycle as you're going. All right. So, but each one of these steps involves a lot of work to do it. There's a lot of art and science in this. So how do we get the initial population? And I actually forgot one slide on here, which is how do you encode your genes? Which what I did was, it's a real encoding. It's the number of acres by transition type to harvest over the 15-year planning horizon for this. So it's a fairly long list of things you can see. 15 years to simulate, I think there was 5 or 6 transition types on that. Then you also have to limit the size of the population. And then you have to decide what are the bounds on the actual treatment you can do. This is one limitations on it, because this came from the project analysis figure. They couldn't do any more work than that on landscape. So there's some constraints kind of built into the background model that don't show up in the GA. So we create 50 of these strings from the initial population. It's all random, pull from random distribution, and off we go. This is the same thing. Louis did a much better presentation of this particular this slide out here, this one and the next one, which is region 3 has a set of desired conditions for each and every landscape, and we do the ecological departure thing just like Louis explained. These are the ones for the dry mist conifer. You can see 60% here in this big open class, a little bit more in the big closed class, and very, very little in the small trees. That classic open park-like kind of conditions is really what they're shooting for. Similarity index, like you said, you need to take the actual proportion versus what you desire, take the minimum of that, sum them all up, subtract from 100, where a lower number is better. So it's really a minimization problem, not a maximization problem, but they're just, flip side of the coins. But then it gets to, when do you calculate this value? There's another part of the art and science of this thing. When do you calculate the departure? Is it for like the final set of states, like in year 2034? Is it the average of all the ones that are out there over the time period? Is it the best one you've ever seen? I mean, there's a lot of art and science to this. I picked the last period for this particular work, just kind of figuring that as the model ran over time, that hopefully it would be working its way towards desired conditions. So here's another part. How do we select our individuals from the parents? Right, so we have this pool of 50, and we have to pick some subset to be the parents. How do you pick those? We obviously want to pick the best ones, because that's how evolution works. Right, survival of the fittest. Classic Darwinian evolution. Once again, a whole lot of ways to do this. Research is chock full of ways to do it. I took a pretty straightforward approach, which I just kind of took a pool of this, basically took about like the top half of them as the pool of parents to look at, as well as there's what's called individual retention. So you want to make sure, this is where you depart from genetic evolution a little bit, where you do keep the best individuals around to make sure you don't lose some of that genetic information. So we don't have immortality, but in the model you can have immortal individuals that live through the whole course of the model. All right, so once we have the pool, we randomly select them, just random uniform random selection. And then you do what's called crossover. And there'll be a little slide where you can see this operations and option. Once again, how many points do you cross over? When you do your genes, how many points? I picked 7. Seemed like a good number from literature I worked at for the size of the genes I had, or the size of the, yeah. And then you mutate. Here's another one of those like parameters that you get to play around with. Like, how often do you mutate? What's the mutation rate? High mutation rate, things change too much to get stability. No mutation, and you don't get any new information in your system. So I picked that. Just picked 1%. So you just go through every gene and mutate it. And it's just random normal on that. So here's just an example of what works. So, and explain the terms for those of you that need a primer and basic genetic things and how these turn. So this is a gene. So this would represent the acres of treatment type A harvested in period B, right? Put all those genes together, that's an individual. Wrap all those individuals, there's a population. So crossover, you do this. You pick a point to cross over in the string or the list. Flip those like that, you get this new one. Then you go through and you do your random thing and you mutate this one, so this one changes to that. So, and then you evaluate the fitness for each one of these and off you go. So then the final thing is, when do you stop this thing, right? Because there's like it just keeps going on and on and on. How do you decide when to stop it? I mean, you could wait until you get to, some best condition, or what I picked. Just the number of generations. There's a little bit of proof of concept stuff here, so I just said after 40 generations, we'll just stop it and see where we're at right there. So remember, so we're doing 40 generations of this for 15 years of STSM simulation. So the ST simulator is just running, all it is doing is basically generating a new landscape for 15 years under a set of treatments that you then evaluate for its ecological departure, and you sum all that up, and that is the fitness function that goes in. So STSim is here, and then you're wrapping the genetic algorithm around that. As you can imagine, and here's, I was in the class today, I was thinking, oh, I so got to redo this because I did this work about 3 years ago, which if y'all are familiar, this is before the SyncroSim package came out. And there's some conversations I had with Paul and Leonardo about how do I actually make this work. And so I used the STSim console using the sub-process calls in Python. So, you know, pretty ancient technology now, even though it's only 3 years long. I built the treatment scenario. I just built a file that looks like the treatment scenario, used a thing, imported into the library. Did use sub scenario, so all the rest, because this wasn't, unfortunately, I didn't do this on a simple model. It was like already a very fully developed, complex model, which retrospect wasn't the best thing to do, but there it was. So anyhow, had all the sub scenarios. So I just took the treatment scenario, slammed it together, the initial conditions, and all that other kind of good stuff. Ran it a whole bunch of times, and it took me like 20 hours to do it. So basically kind of an overnight kind of run to do this one. So how did this work out? I think I'm still doing it on time to do this. Here's what happened if you sort of like don't do anything, right? Here's the blue line is what you do if you just don't do anything at all. You just let it grow. The orange line is what the silviculturist on the forces of his proposed action or what happens. So this has the, you know, the map skit or the, you know, how to lie with graphs kind of thing going on, right? Because, you know, right at 81, it shows like, hey, it's going good, but really it's not. It's only going like 4%. And the way we defined it, anything above 60% departure is highly departed. So essentially the system, for all intents and purposes, has not changed a bit from the results, which is really not what a decision maker wants to do. He or she does not want to sign a document that says, we're going to do all this work and spend all this money to have zero effect. So evaluate the genetic algorithm. This is just kind of average of all the ones we're doing over time over the generations. As you can see, it's working. I mean, it's doing what it's supposed to do. You know, you kind of start hearing over the generations, it gets better and better and better and better. So the genetic algorithm is working as I had hoped it would. What happens though? So if we look at a little bit into the details a little bit. So for each time step, here's all the individuals. Here's the fitness or the ecological departure score for all the individuals in there. So you can see it kind of makes some quick improvements, and then it kind of stalls out a little bit. As you can see that this is the first generation, and actually the first generation actually isn't any better than, is actually worse than the you know, proposed action. By the time we get to the end, you know, the fourth generation, things worked pretty good. The average is actually surprisingly enough kind of online with what the human solution. The best solution though, the best solution has improved enough so that it's got down in here into that. So it's done quite a bit. It's found a better solution than what we do from human. The only issue I had with this is it didn't improve anywhere near like I hoped and expected that it would. I mean, we're still at a very highly departed condition. Even though applying all these treatments, we still really haven't moved the landscape in the 15 years closer to our desired conditions. So what do we get from all this? First of all, this is kind of a proof of concept on that. First thing, it worked. Successfully applied the genetic algorithm. It actually worked. You know, a lot of technical hurdles, but it got through it. It did find there are better solutions for this important solution out there. So there is a better answer out there. Like I said, it did not perform as well as maybe I shouldn't say expected, hoped it would do. It seemed to have gotten stuck in a few solution spaces, so I obviously need to go back and do some work. It could point to, because this dry mix conifer type, I mean, we had a bunch of people on all the forests, all trying human solutions to look through. So we had a lot of other people besides me just kind of doing the hunt and peck, kind of like changing the number here, changing the number here to try and get an answer. And no one had been able to find a good answer. So that's why I thought maybe if we took a little more rigorous operations research thing, it might help a little bit, which it did. So there might be some issues, which is just the model itself. Could be the fact we don't have good management transitions. Could just be, the genetic algorithm needs a lot of work on there, which kind of gets us into the next steps on this, which is sort of recode it in SyncroSim, kind of bring it up to the modern age, maybe even do some other things on there. One thing that I didn't do on this, just because of the runtime, was only ran like one replicate for each population, which is, given the randomness, was probably not the best of solutions. So it could be the ecological departure differentiation had less to do with real difference than just the stochastic nature of it. So, run it a few more times, add some management transitions in there, more silvicultures in there. Maybe look at which states get the management, because it's a pretty broad brush on there. And then maybe do some work on the genetic algorithm itself, look at different encodings, look at different selection, crossing, all those basic processes to do that. So there's still a lot of work to be done on that. So just to wrap things up, talked a little bit about what I did, reviewed the genetic algorithm, hopefully you all know a little bit more about it, discussed how I implemented it in one particular project, looked at some results, and I laid out a few next steps on where I can go with this work. And with that, I am done, and I'm ready to facilitate questions if I have any time.